The sky is clear, not one cloud, not one drop of rain, nothing to explain the sound of an axe splitting wood for the 600th day in a row. He doesn't look up when the neighbors gather at the fence line to laugh again. He's heard every joke they have. He's heard worse. Behind him rises a structure taller than any building for 100 miles. Plank after plank of gopher wood, sealed inside and out with pitch, built by hands that have been cracked and bleeding for longer than some of these young men have been alive. He is not a builder by trade. He is not a wealthy man. And there is not, as far as anyone can see, a single reason on earth for what he's doing. What could make a man give 30 years of his life to something the whole world was certain he would never need? Welcome back to Histolingo. If stories like this one are your kind of thing, stay a while. There's more where this came from. This is the story of Noah and of the boat that shouldn't have mattered to anyone until it was the only thing that did. Long before the ark, before the mockery, before his name meant anything to anyone outside his own household, Noah lived the way most men of his time lived. He farmed the land his father had farmed. He raised his sons to do the same. He watched the seasons turn, the way people had watched them turn for generations, trusting that tomorrow would look enough like today. The world around him, though, had stopped resembling anything worth trusting. Cruelty had become ordinary. Violence had become background noise. Noah noticed it the way you notice a slow change in weather. Not all at once, but every year a little colder. He kept his own house differently. Not perfectly, no one ever is, but deliberately, quietly, in a way that, without him seeking it, made him stand out. That difference is the whole reason this story exists at all. The instruction came to Noah alone in the ordinary rhythm of an ordinary day, and it asked something no reasonable person would agree to. Build a vessel, enormous, specific, built to exact measurements he'd never worked with before, to survive a flood that hadn't started in a world that hadn't seen real rain in living memory. There was no proof yet, no dark clouds gathering on the horizon to make the warning feel urgent, just his own conviction and the strange, heavy certainty that this was not something he could set aside and forget by morning. He told his sons they believed him, or they trusted him enough to act as if they did, and that was enough to begin. And so the hammering started. It would not stop for decades. Word travels fast in a small world, and the sound of that hammering became something people organized their days around, not to help, but to laugh. Passers-by made a habit of stopping at the fence line. Children were brought by their parents specifically to see the fool with the boat on dry land. The jokes calcified into local legend long before the ark was half finished. Noah kept working, year after year, plank after plank, through seasons that gave him no evidence at all that he was right and everyone else was wrong. That's the part of this story easiest to lose. Not the flood, not the animals 2 by 2, but the sheer, unglamorous length of the waiting. Decades of a joke with no punchline in sight. But, and this is worth sitting with, conviction that costs you nothing isn't really conviction. Has cost him 3 decades of being the man the whole world laughed at. Eventually, the animals came, not driven by Noah, not gathered by force, but arriving on their own, in pairs, exactly as he'd been told they would. His family loaded the ark with grain, with water, with everything a household and a menagerie would need to outlast a world they couldn't yet imagine underwater. And then, at last, the door was shut. Not by Noah's hand alone, the story tells us, but sealed, final, complete, no longer open to those still standing outside laughing, Still no rain. Still a clear sky. For 7 more days, while a family sat inside a boat on dry land with a door that no longer opened, waiting to find out if 30 years of conviction had been worth it. And then it came. The rain that fell didn't arrive gently. It arrived like the sky itself had broken open, and it did not stop for 40 days and nights. The world Noah had known, the fields, the fence line where the neighbors used to gather, every voice that had ever mocked him, disappeared beneath water that kept rising long after anyone watching from land could have survived to see it. Inside the ark, there was no view of any of that, just the sound of rain on wood, the animals, his family, and the quiet, terrible knowledge that everything outside those walls was gone. He had built for this exact moment for 30 years, and even so, nothing could have prepared him for what it meant to actually live inside it. The rain stopped. The waters didn't. For months, the ark simply floated. No shore in sight, no certainty that dry land still existed anywhere at all. Noah sent a raven out to search, and later a dove, watching the sky each time for some sign that the world was returning. The dove came back empty the first time. Then it came back carrying an olive leaf, small, plain, and yet it meant more than almost anything else in this entire story. It meant the water was going down. It meant something was growing again. He waited still. Patience, by this point in his life, was not a virtue he was practicing for the first time. It was the only skill he had left. When the ark finally came to rest and the door opened again, the first thing Noah noticed wasn't the sunlight or the mud-flattened world stretching out in front of him. It was the quiet. For 30 years, the sound of his own hammering had been the backdrop to his entire life. Mocked, relentless, constant. Now the hammering had stopped, and so had the laughter that used to answer it. The silence that replaced both said more than either ever had. He stepped out onto solid ground with his family, with the animals, with nothing left of the old world except the boat behind him and the small green leaf his family still kept. He built an altar there, not out of triumph, but out of something closer to gratitude, the kind that only makes sense to a person who has genuinely wondered whether they'd survive to feel it. Here's what's easy to miss about this story. If you only remember the flood and the animals, the ark was never really about the boat. It was about 30 years of a man doing something right for reasons only he could hear, while the entire world he lived in told him he was wasting his life. The hammering that once made him a joke became, in hindsight, the only sound worth having listened to. And the silence that followed it, the one that told him the work was finally, truly finished, was the quietest, fullest sound of his life. Most of us will never build an ark, but most of us know at some point what it feels like to keep doing something right while no one around us understands why, and to wonder quietly whether we're the fool everyone thinks we are. Noah's answer to that question took 30 years to arrive. But it arrived. Sometimes the work that looks the most foolish is the only work that was ever going to matter. If this story stayed with you, consider subscribing to Histolingo. There are more like it waiting.